So for those that are watching this, just wanted to welcome you. I'm Chris Carver, co-founder and CEO of Lennd, and this is a pretty special interview for me, especially since we just finished our first event with the PGA of America, and I thought it'd be incredible to share what we did together. I, definitely think it was really special because in a time like this, I think it's really important to share, some of the nuances. And so without further ado, I wanted to introduce Patrick Kravitz, the media relations specialist with the PGA of America, and Liz Elliott, the championship technology manager with the PGA of America. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
So before we kind of dive into the meat of this, can one of you give me a brief explanation of who or what is the PGA of America for those that aren't diehard golf folks?
Yeah, it's a question we receive all the time. And whenever we go to a new city with a championship or a new market for anything, we always try to describe who we are, our place in the golf industry. At our core, we're a member organization of 29,000 that's dedicated to advancing the sport in inclusion, advancing the sport in numbers, and really try to grow our game in so many different areas. With that, we have a handful of championships that we manage. You mentioned the PGA Championship a couple of weeks ago. That's our kind of annual men's event that we run on the PGA Tour schedule. We have our KPMG Women's PGA Championship on the LPGA Tour schedule. KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship on the PGA Tour Champions schedule. And every 4 years, we run the Ryder Cup on the US side, and we're involved whenever it's in Europe. But at our core, we are that member organization of 29,000. That's
awesome. And there's definitely a number of entities in in professional golf, right? And how does that fit within the other ones? There's the PGA Tour, there's you guys. How does that all fit?
Yeah, no, there's so many organizations in golf.
Yeah.
It's a confusing industry. There's a lot of letters, PGA, acronyms, the LPGA Tour, Ladies European Tour. We are obviously a separate organization from those folks, but I can tell you that we're very collaborative with those groups, especially over the last 6 months when we've all, tried to figure this thing out. We've been in constant communication really at every level, certainly in the media and PR space. It seems like we're on, if not weekly calls, every couple weeks. And I know our leadership has great relationships with the groups. So
that's awesome.
It is, while we are separate organizations, we certainly work with each other whenever we can, and certainly try to grow the sport together.
That's cool. Yeah. I mean, because with the PGA Championship, it's on the PGA Tour. It's a stop of the PGA Tour. With the women's PGA, you're doing that in tandem with the LPGA. So I can see how a lot of those different organizations coexist. It's really cool to, I've seen how much you guys interact and share best practices, at least in the time that we've worked together. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Hopefully I didn't mutilate your positions or roles or titles, I guess, but do you mind expanding on those roles and responsibilities for each of you?
Liz, you can go ahead first.
Sure. So I work within the technology department inside of PGA. We're a group of, a couple dozen folks who really support the enterprise productivity of the PGA Association, and then also help with kind of innovative ideas and driving the association forward in terms of technology. So personally, I have a team of 4 talented engineers and product folks.
I think we lost her. Well, while she's figuring that out, why don't you jump into your role? This is a quality.
We didn't experience this at the PGA Championship.
No, you didn't. Funny enough, I've actually had to change my computer because every time I was on one of these, literally 10% of the time, something like this would happen. So I just got a new computer so that it wouldn't.
Well, thank you for doing that
But
before ours.
yeah, we at least got a still of Liz
sure.
as she comes back. Yeah. So what go to yours?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So my role is more focused on the championship side. I would say I would spend maybe 60% of my role preparing for those spectator championships that I mentioned, specifically on the media operations side, which means I'm basically the point person for any credentialed media member at those events as it relates to how they arrive, what type of access they receive. I'm not on an island. I certainly have plenty of people both at PGA of America that support me on that, as well as volunteers, vendors, other outside media operations professionals. But overall, it's an exciting role, and it's really kind of evolved even over the last several years.
That's awesome. And how did you get into all this, Patrick?
Yeah. Liz just sent me a Slack message, by the way, and said her Zoom crashed.
Yep.
So we will see if she's able to get back on.
Reboot her computer.
As for how I got into this position, my first internship in sports was in 2012 at the PGA Championship at Kiawah Island. I was in the middle of my undergrad at Ohio University studying sport management. So I always wanted to work in sports, but I never really identified which area. I kind of went in with no plans, which was kind of daunting in many ways. Welcome back, Liz.
Yeah. It happens. It happens.
It does. So it was kind of a situation where my first role was in golf, and it kind of snowballed into a career. Had a couple other internships after that, a trip out west to Chambers Bay for the US Open, where I worked for the United States Golf Association, another one of these large organizations in golf, and then ultimately made my way to South Florida towards the end of 2016.
Got it. And sorry, Liz, you're back.
Internet issues.
Hey, I hear you.
Welcome to 2020.
Yeah. So you're part of a team of a couple dozen. That's a pretty big team.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We got a good technology team, strong technology team. So my personal team that I oversee and collaborate with, we work as consultants and also, they're engineers and build some of the solutions to solve problems for either our internal stakeholders, but ultimately our customers who are spectators, staff and support for championship, and then internal kind of business operations for the championships themselves.
And Patrick was just going through it, but I have to ask, how did you get your start in the industry, and what led you to this point?
Sure. I'll try to make it a quick version, but I've been in the industry for about 20 years. So I'm a veteran. Yeah. When I graduated high school, I went out to California to college and was an English major, and dropped out about a year and a half later and decided to move to New York City and work in the fashion styling industry as an office manager. And the guy sitting behind me, who was getting paid much more than me, was a HTML developer. I guess we called them web producers back then. And I thought, he's making so much more than me, and it doesn't seem that hard. So I would turn my chair around and kind of watch what he was doing and learn that. So I became a web producer. Ultimately, I, turned into an engineer or a web developer, and then transitioned to a technical project manager for a couple years, more recently. And worked in a bunch of different industries, including banking, the fashion styling industry, and now in sports. So it's been a fun journey.
And how long have you been with the PGA, Liz?
About 3 years.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. So when you had the opportunity, obviously Patrick, it sounded like you were pretty intentional. I want to work in sports. Liz, you had this opportunity come up. What was that feeling like? What was it? Yeah. What were you thinking at that point?
So at our last position that you and I, Chris, were talking about just before this call, one of my colleagues, George Whitaker, worked there, and we had gotten to know each other really well and worked together for a number of years at that business. And he moved over to the PGA and called me while I was kind of doing my own thing and had opened my own business and a family business and was working as like an entrepreneur, and said, hey, I'd love for you to come over and join us at PGA. And at that point, it just felt like the right opportunity in the right place, right location. So I said yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Patrick, you kind of alluded to this, but I'd love to, kind of hear a little bit more from both of you. How much are you collaborating with other organizations on best practices, Liz, technology? And if you do, who do you find yourself collaborating with the most?
Yeah. I mentioned a little bit on the front end. We always connect with kind of these other major stakeholders in golf, at least once a year, but I think more frequently, again, over the last 6 months. And that includes the LPGA Tour, the Ladies European Tour, the PGA Tour, European Tour, RNA, Augusta National, and the USGA. Those are kind of the 7 groups that we are in touch with frequently. And we're watching their events, trying to share best practices as much as we can, because collectively, when each of us are succeeding, golf can grow as a sport. Beyond that, our team connected with the NBA, Major League Baseball over the last 6 months to really understand how they were preparing for their return, specifically, again, with how they were going to manage the media operation. So it is important for us to kind of go beyond the sport of golf and really see what some of these other groups are doing. But those were kind of the main conversations that we were having.
And Liz, from a technology standpoint, are you collaborating with other folks, or you have a pretty big team, so there's a lot of internal knowledge there too.
Yeah, we definitely reach out to other, contacts in the golf industry, but I think everybody on our technology team also brings along a wealth of kind of contacts from other places, as Pat was saying. So generally the event industry, there's a lot of kind of overlap with what we do and what they do in terms of ticketing, credentialing, media, all that type of stuff, handling artists and contestants in a similar way. But we also we're pretty tight with our enterprise vendors too. So we have good relationships with Amazon, and Google and Lennd, for example. So when we have a question about what others are doing, a lot of times we'll go out to our partner vendors, and ask them, like, what have you seen in the industry? What's your experience been? So we can learn from them too.
That's cool. That's helpful. So before we jump into kind of what we did with the virtual media hub, and maybe Patrick, this is a good question for you, but can you walk me through what historically goes into managing media on site and how you execute it? I know there's a lot there, but for context, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, traditionally, I would say we're starting our media planning for an event maybe around 18 months out. We have a team of maybe 3 or 4 that are positioned at these championships. So Kiowa Island is the host of next year's PGA Championship. We've had a team out there for really the better part of the last year and a half. And they're starting to produce site plans specifically as soon as they arrive on site, which includes obviously the media center. So in terms of my preparation for that space, again, it's working closely on the credentialing side. Now that we're partnered up with you and your team at Lennd, it's really trying to hone in on how we can best provide the proper access to media and really study that. We have a good understanding of who from a national and international level should receive which type of access, but But on a local level, since we are kind of a rotating championship and moving to new markets each year, we work closely with a PR agency in that specific market to better understand those relationships and the types of media that they have, again, in that region. So I think it's really trying to prepare for the media center, credentialing, working closely with vendors to ensure that we have everything set up so that once people arrive on site, they can do their job with little to no help at all.
And can you give me a visual of what this media footprint is like on site, whether it's a media center, number of media typically in a pre-COVID environment?
Yeah, so we have I don't have the exact figure as it relates to how much square footage, but it's a pretty large facility. It has space for about 250 working press seats. There's a photographer's room with about 40 seats, which includes lockers. There's a giant interview room that can hold up to 200 people. It has a camera riser. We have about 20 radio booths. There's a large media dining area, and there's a really kind of giant video board that can show the broadcasts on multiple feeds, as well as the leaderboard. So it's an impressive space when you're on site. It is a place that we try and show to our partners, to future site personnel, because it is impressive once you're there, and the video board certainly stands out. But overall, there's typically around 800 media that we've historically credentialed at the PGA Championship. I think one of the main challenges that our group is constantly facing is we have 800 people who all would love to have a seat, but we really only have space for about 250 of them. So that's definitely one of the main challenges is trying to maximize the space as best that we can.
Wow. And that's a temporary structure. It's not like it's something
right. Yeah, no, it's full on tent. They make it look really nice. Props to our ops team and certainly all the vendors that we bring in. It's a comfortable facility. You certainly don't feel like you're in a tent. It's very professionally done when you're in there. There are instances at our KPMG Women's PGA Championship and the KitchenAid Senior PGA Championship where those typically have a little bit smaller footprint requirements. We are sometimes able to leverage permanent facilities, whether it's a clubhouse or some other building that's on site. But for the most part, we're working out of a tent for the better part of 10 days.
And I know you had mentioned, a pretty small core team, but what does the operational team look like to support that size on site, from vendors, contractors, temp workers?
Yeah, we have, I want to say maybe 5 or 6 PGA of America professionals and working on the PR side that are on site, usually around 40 to 50 volunteers, not at a time, but over the course of the week. If I had to guess, maybe a dozen vendors that have some sort of reason to be in the media center and supporting those efforts. The local PR agency that I mentioned earlier, they typically have a few people. And we have a group of maybe 6 to 8 individuals that have kind of traveled to the PGA Championship and worked for us in more of an official capacity, that have experience on the media operations side. They have institutional knowledge of how our championships run, and we can kind of lean on them for the variety of tasks that come up. But it's a large team, and everybody's kind of working on different things, but we're all kind of steering in the same direction.
Interesting. So take me back to, I think it was March. Yeah, I think it was March of this year, and walk me through what's going through your guys' heads, both personally and as it pertains to your events.
March, wow, feels like a lifetime ago.
It's COVID years.
Yeah. I mean, obviously there's a lot of question marks, both personally and professionally. We're lucky to live in Florida where we can go outside and be socially isolated and enjoy beautiful weather. So I think we have it a little bit better than potentially other people. But yeah, I mean, as a company that that relies heavily on the popularity and revenue from professional championship sports, it was a little bit scary, at least for us as employees, to consider what impact that might have on our company. Pat, I'm sure you could speak to specifically the media center and what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I went back and looked to see when our last date was, and in the office it was March 13, and that's obviously when everything kind of came down across the world, but really in the sports industry, that's when things kind of shut down. For me professionally, we had really just launched our credentialing for the PGA Championship like a week or 2 weeks before that. So I'm trying to process in real time, okay, what does this mean for the PGA Championship, which was scheduled to be played in mid-May. So only, I guess, 2 months later. So those were kind of the questions that I was asking, or how is this going to impact our events? And certainly I think everybody to some degree was asking that, and trying to prepare for what could become a rescheduled date or a cancellation or whatever the case was. But like Liz said, there was a lot of uncertainty.
And so obviously we go through a period of time where, and there's still a lot of uncertainty, but you go through a period of time where it's just, a cloud. And then maybe it was the decision about moving the event from May, but how would you describe the challenges you were faced with when it came to media covering the PGA Championship once you started thinking about August?
Yeah. So even before we knew that we were moving the championship from May to August, we started meeting internally. Originally, John Dever, my boss, he's the director of PR for championships. We had a meeting that morning of March 13 and started laying out scenarios of, are we going to have a full media center with 800 media? Are we going to have half of that? Are we going to have a handful? Are we going to have no media? These were kind of the questions that we were kind of thrown out there and playing with those scenarios. The most important thing, I think, to us when trying to solve for this new situation was to make sure that media would be able to have player access. It didn't necessarily mean that they had to be on site, and we obviously learned, which we'll get into, of media can have access to players even if they're remote. But I think one of the situations I was following early on was how were media interacting with players, not necessarily in golf because golf had shut down at that point, but the NFL draft was one of the first kind of major virtual events in sports, really across any industry, but that was one that I think everybody was paying attention to. And I remember reading an interview with Sal Paolantonio of ESPN, and he spoke of the importance of being able to talk to a player and have that dialogue directly with the player. And I know there's kind of there's an easy process of, well, I'm going to be there with the player. I can receive your question and then read it on your behalf, and we can get the answer and transcribe it and send it to you. But that's not really valuable to media. They want to be able to hear the player. They want to be able to see the player. They want to be able to ask follow-up questions if they need to. They want to ask the question in their own voice. So it was really trying to understand how we could do that in a way that I think media would grasp onto.
And so at what point in time is this where you're saying, okay, we need to figure this out? So when was that, Patrick? Was that right in March, or did it kind of settle in and it would start to happen in April?
Yeah, I think it was more, we had a good feeling things were going to move, but we didn't know for sure until April. The tour announced on April 17 that our championship, along with several of their events, were moving to new dates. So I would say maybe a week or 2 weeks before that announcement, we had a really good understanding of, okay, this is happening. The championship's moving to August. At that point, we didn't announce a spectatorless championship, which, having spectators, if we were to have had spectators, which obviously was really not even a consideration at this point. But our whole media announcement of having limited media on site was really predicated on that spectator aspect. But yeah, I think early April was when things started to get a little bit more real. And
obviously you guys collaborate a ton, 2 different departments. What are the discussions like at that point internally? Like what are these meetings like? Yeah, like you're meeting with John and Liz, you're meeting with a bunch of people, and what was that feeling like at that point?
Yeah, I think Liz, you can speak probably better to this than I can, but it was such a unique period because we had just started working from home and traditionally we're in an office. So everybody's starting to learn these new tools that we have available to us to kind of help that. So from having everybody start learning how to do video conference meetings and sharing screens and learning that process while also trying to balance we have a major event that we need to figure out how our roles are going to have to evolve. It was a very kind of complicated time, but I think everybody rose to the occasion. And from my perspective, I don't think the collaboration had ever been better. I would say that for Liz and I, we certainly had a relationship in the office of working on projects, but to the degree that we've been working together the last 6 months, it felt like every 2 hours we were on some sort of a call. So collaboration was kind of at this utmost priority, and I think everybody appreciated that.
Yeah, Liz, I definitely don't want to underplay the role of technology because it's a significant size in PGA. So it clearly was, it seems like it was something that they wanted to invest in a while ago, but I feel like at a time like this, your department just becomes that much more important.
Yeah. And I think while Pat, was, brightly fixated on what the media were expecting and in terms of like access to the player and how they were going to accomplish that. And watching the NFL draft and just kind of seeing how that all played out, like from the technology side, we were analyzing, well, like, how did they actually accomplish it from, using technology, like reading articles, doing research, reaching out to contacts and finding out, well, what was the infrastructure like? And, like, did they send everybody a little AV package and who was in their house? What happens if somebody started playing a video game, and messed with their network, strength. So yeah, I mean, I think we both kind of came at it from different angles, and ultimately, that's the strength of collaborating, coming from different places, is really understanding like what the needs are and working together. I think the other thing is, we're all working remotely, like all of our video feeds are the same size. Like there's something equalizing about kind of being all remote. We're all in the same boat. In some ways, like we're all in this together. There was much more of a feeling of that when everybody was working from home and dealing with like kids who weren't able to be in school, disruptions, like normal everyday Wi-Fi dropping, like all of that kind of helps kind of make us feel like we're in this together. We're going to solve this problem together. We'll all come at it from different angles, and we'll all respect each other, and we'll all find the right solution together. So
that's awesome.
A good change, a good evolution, I think, for PGA generally.
Yeah. It'll be so interesting to see how these organizations, even one as old as the PGA, will end up evolving the way you work over, because I'm sure there's going to be some things that stick even when things go back at some point. before we kind of dive in, so who were some of the key stakeholders in really pushing this through? Like, was everybody on board with trying, with this, or how did you guys start to organize yourselves?
Yeah, again, it kind of came to every single department had some sort of influence on this project. I would say from obviously a media PR side, we had full support across our department. Our chief commercial officer bought in almost immediately. Those on the championships department side, again, their buy-in was immediate. And I think to me, that was very helpful. Not necessarily having to sell this idea, but more so having enough time to be like, okay, we need to solve for these 25 issues. And having kind of the support of everybody behind us was critical. And I'm sure Liz can speak to the technology team support as well. That was certainly critical.
Yeah, I mean, at least with us, it was very important that we had buy-in from the main, the directors, the senior director and the CFO who we report to. So keeping that whole team in the loop, making sure that, everybody was comfortable with a Zoom solution, for example, and what tools that we already have an enterprise relationship with that we could leverage potentially here, as opposed to going outside to someone new who we don't necessarily have that relationship with. So lots of people, lots of collaboration.
Yeah. And so when you think about your goals and objectives, what would you say were the top goals and objectives in, trying to implement something as, something like a media hub, virtual media hub?
Yeah, obviously the player access, player interviews was one of our top priorities, but kind of above that was the communication level, making sure that our tools allowed both ourselves to communicate effectively, but also for media to really be able to take in that information in a way that was seamless. I think one of the unique things about our organization and the championships that we run, we typically only see these folks once a year, maybe twice a year. So a lot of our relationships are virtual in the sense of we're communicating with them through email. We're not the PGA Tour where they have week-to-week events. They see these folks often. So we have experience with these relationships being virtual, and that certainly helped. We understand that we have one kind of big opportunity each year to showcase ourselves in the best light and ultimately create a helpful opportunity for them to succeed in their roles. And communication is obviously that number one priority. And so we were able to work closely with your team in identifying how we could most effectively do that through notifications, through a news and alerts kind of bulletin board. And I'm sure we're going to get to some of these aspects of the media hub, but the communication was so important for this project.
So this might sound like a loaded question, naive question, but there are still people that, are doing it this way. So I have to ask, like, why not just spin up a video conference, like a Zoom, a WebEx, Teams, Hangout, and just do your interviews that way? What was why not just do that?
No, it's a good question. There is still value in kind of having a face-to-face dialogue. I think there is a convenience factor. We learned through the course of the week that even those that were on site, they became more comfortable with using our video conferencing tool. We use Zoom. They became very comfortable by the end of the week of just calling in from the media center because maybe they only had one question and it wasn't necessarily worth the 30-minute walk it would have been to and from this area. So I think there's going to be a nice balance moving forward. It doesn't mean that we won't have people on site. It doesn't mean we won't have a remote operation. I think there's value in both. Media budgets are kind of all over the place right now. And we've seen kind of the impact that the pandemic has had on those who are in the media space. So we're trying to adapt the best that we can to make sure that, you know, if somebody can't afford to travel, or if an outlet doesn't want to send somebody or doesn't want to send multiple people, we can create opportunities for them to still have a very similar experience. We know it's not the same, but we want to replicate that experience the best way that we can. So
the media hub becomes like a one-stop shop or portal where, you know, they're getting some of the same experiences as they would be on site, where they're getting messages directly from media specialists that are really only for the media audience. They're not getting this, you know, just what every other kind of normal spectator is getting. They're still getting kind of that insider's view. With the media hub, you know, they had direct access, support access to media specialists. They had a schedule that they could watch kind of in real time. So there were a lot of advantages to giving them a one-stop shop that only they were approved to see, that gave them links to all of the resources that they needed to be able to do their jobs throughout the championship.
Interesting. Yeah. So I want to, if you don't mind, I want to walk through kind of sequentially the process of managing media now virtually. Maybe this is not the first step. I think it's the first step, but as far as I know, the first step was to collect applications, right? Allow people to apply to cover the event. Is that?
Yes. Yeah, that's step one. And that's step one, whether they were covering it through the media hub only, or whether they were one of the select few that had on-site access.
And you obviously wanted the tool to be able to, you know, kind of vet those media that you may not know, but you also had a pool of media that you do know. So at what point do you then, what's the next step in that process once they're vetted?
Yeah, so I guess specifically to the media hub, it got to a point this year, and I feel like this could change as we move forward, but it was a brand new platform for us, and word started to spread a little bit through some proactive outreach via either our PR agency or a couple people working on our behalf to make sure that people knew this was available to them. So there were probably more applications that I was unfamiliar with this year than previous years, just because there were these brand new audiences from really all over the world that have access to this. So there was a lot of kind of, hey, I don't necessarily recognize this outlet. Did you push them our way? And obviously working closely with the folks doing that outreach, as long as they kind of were the folks that were directing these outlets our way, there was a trust factor there. But we have a PR agency that does a lot of research on outlets and make sure that they should have this level of access. But once they're approved, we kind of just go through the Lennd portal and send them an invitation to join the hub. It's a pretty quick process, maybe 30 seconds at the most.
Yeah. One of the things I remember is it was pretty important for you guys to connect it to your credentialing process, even though, because you still had some on site, and then you had obviously a majority of it, you know, remotely, virtually. Why was that the case?
Yeah, it was just seamless, really, for us. And there's an advantage on the media side too of not having to do multiple applications. But for us to just have everything in one place was so convenient. You know, anybody who works in events knows how hectic an event week can be. So the more that you can do to set up kind of these seamless experiences as an administrator, it really helps in this scenario, having everything in one place so that we could credential people through the media hub that week in a way that allowed them to experience the championship. It was just really helpful to have it all kind of right there.
Cool. And Liz, you kind of mentioned this before, but I want to walk through kind of the components of why they were important. So you had mentioned being able to access, I guess, a real-time schedule of press conferences and interviews as they came up. Well, why? And this is probably again a loaded question, but why is that important to media, whether it's virtually or on site?
I'm sure Pat can answer that question better than I could, since the media are his customers.
Sure.
Yeah, I think on the player interview schedule specifically, for those that don't necessarily follow golf, the process as a player finishes their round, they go into a scoring tent to sign their scorecard. And if they're requested for interviews, that's typically as soon as they leave that scoring area, that's when a PR professional from whichever organization will kind of escort them through those stops, whether it's just one stop at the media hub area, or if our broadcast partners, ESPN, CBS, SiriusXM, Sky Sports, Golf Channel, if they all kind of request them, we push them through that process. I think the issue, or one of the challenges, I should say, of communicating that virtually is that if a player is requested for multiple stops, it's kind of difficult to really understand, okay, when are they actually going to be on the Zoom call? So we had a person helping our team in an extraordinary way from Louisville, based in Louisville, and we set her up with feeds. Liz can talk about all of her setup, but she was basically responsible for adding players to this schedule based on the requests that we were receiving, again, through the media hub, and estimating when that player might actually be in that Zoom call. And for the most part, it was generally very accurate. Once she put that player on the schedule, it was up to me being on site, seeing these things kind of unfolding in real time, making the proper tweaks to the schedule, seeing that Tiger Woods is going to be requested by ESPN, then he's going to do a stop with Golf Channel, then he's going to do a Sirius XM stop. What time does he actually make his way to the Zoom call? So there were a lot of moving pieces once you arrive on site, and it's kind of difficult to plan for that component because every player is kind of unique in how long they speak to media. But we were fortunate to have a lot of people supporting us both on site and remotely.
Yeah, golf is unique in that, from 1 hour to the next, it could change. So somebody could have a hole in one, somebody could have a great round, somebody could totally fall down. And those are the people that all of a sudden show up, as a request through the media hub that maybe would have been totally unexpected. There's no way to plan for that from like a staff and support side. So being able to really control the schedule in real time was super important because, in real time, that schedule was changing. And so for us to be able to just have it and post it, and the media could kind of keep their eyes on it, not only in person, but remotely and in the media center, and see people's names shift and times change and see people's names added. That was really important to keep them in the loop of what was going on and whether or not their request was being granted for a particular player.
And was that also where, did you guys leverage alerts in that regard? Or how did you communicate out to people?
Yeah. Through the media hub, we had SMS notifications. So if a media member was interested in a particular player or a particular interview, they had the option to receive notifications straight to their phone. If there were any significant changes to those times, most of the time it was, okay, we had this player scheduled for 1 o'clock and it looks like it's closer to 1:10. So you just kind of push them back. But if it was a significant, hey, this player was scheduled at 1 o'clock, but now it's going to be 4 o'clock. That's something that we kind of pushed out as an alert via email, via text, just again, to kind of keep that communication flowing as best that we could.
And what else did you use the alerts for? I mean, I remember seeing a handful of different things, but from your perspective, what were those and why were they important?
So for the news and alerts section of the Media Hub, we pushed 99 different pieces of information, and the types of information really varied. We had a lot of different field updates early in the week, with some players deciding to withdraw from the field. So providing those, okay, who are the new players that are actually in the field now, being able to provide that in real time was helpful. There were 2 different rulings that happened on the golf course that we were able to push an alert through that system.
What's a ruling?
A ruling is if a player breaks a rule on the golf course, and kind of what stroke penalty they incurred, why
something media
that
should
penalty.
know.
Yes, exactly. So that process, our Chief Championships Officer, Carrie Haig, if a ruling takes place, we get an email internally of here's what happened. And at that point, we're able to push it forward out to media. But we sent a variety of these news and alerts, a lot of different resources, hole locations, pairings, notes packages. So it was just a kind of a one-stop shop for any sort of real-time information that was happening.
And one of the things I noticed is, although you had a ton of interviews with players, you did have other interviews. How do you think that went off, and what was now after the fact? How are you thinking about those things?
Yeah, we do have a handful of interviews that happen beyond the players, and it's typically earlier in the week. We annually have a PGA Championship news conference that features our organization's president, CEO, and Chief Championships Officer. I think the unique part of that press conference is normally that happens at a table. They're seated next to each other. We obviously did not have that option this year. So Liz can probably speak better to kind of the logistics behind that, but that was an interesting process that we had to solve for.
Fun process. Yeah, we scattered folks around the golf course. I mean, it was interesting. It was great. But I think also along the course of the championship week, there were other folks, that had interesting roles during the championship that warranted interviews, including the marker who played around early on, and some other folks, and even Pat and I looked at each other during championship rounds and said, who else can we get here? Because people, it's just interesting to interview people. Yeah. It was so easy and seamless. And, we did have a lot of interest even over Zoom of folks attending those interviews that weren't players. So I think it's a lesson learned for us that there's an opportunity there to get, the general manager of Harding Park to speak, and some other folks who work behind the scenes that have interesting stories to tell too.
Yeah, I think there was one early in the week with the CBS crew. I think it was CBS crew. And it's just fascinating to see how they're prepping for the broadcast. I mean, I actually thought it was pretty entertaining, to say the least. One of the components of the Media Hub was being able to access transcripts. Again, this may seem obvious, but why was that important, and why is it important to have it so fast? And
yeah, it's kind of this expectation, once an interview's finished, that the transcript will be ready within 10 minutes. And the reason is, especially nowadays where news is really 24/7, having access to what a player said, and being able to either post it on social media if you're, again, a media member, or if you're posting a story in the middle of the day, just being able to pull those clips out as quickly as possible is so critical. And it allows the championship to be covered in a way that's dynamic. The team at ASAP Sports is the group that we used for transcription. And I think they enjoyed the week. They're typically on site with us. This was one of the first years, perhaps the first year, that they were not on site at a PGA Championship. And from my understanding, they just kind of hung out at their house and stayed in the Zoom room, and they were pushing things out quicker than I've ever seen before. So transcripts, it's a necessity, and obviously we use them, media use them pretty much all day. And
you also had the ability, and I'm curious how this was received, but be able to preview a recording review a recording of each interview after the fact.
We used worked with a company, Imagen, that houses a lot of digital media assets, including our photo albums, complimentary photos that we made available, as well as all of these interview press conferences, so that they could be used by affiliates in their nightly newscasts. The media had the option to download those clips and use select portions for their coverage. So not only for that scenario of being able to use it in their coverage was it helpful, but also for us to go back and watch, and I'm sure media to go back and watch and see how a player said something, or it was nice to have that option. And again, very similar to transcripts, those video links were available within minutes of a press conference's, within a few minutes of a press conference ending.
That's cool. And then another component that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is you gave access to a real-time feed of scoring shots with the ability to search it by player. Why is that important? And walk me through why you guys wanted to have that in there.
Yeah, so we worked with WSC Sports, who automatically generates these clips of anything that makes it to a broadcast, any shot that makes it to a broadcast. So anything that was on ESPN or CBS would automatically pull a clip and generate whatever 30-second to minute-long video, and publish it to the media hub to allow media, again, to kind of go back and watch and see how a player approached a certain shot or watch a big moment. I've gone back and watched Colin Morikawa's eagle on number 16 probably 15 times in the past week. So it really kind of lets you go back on demand and watch these things unfold.
That's great. And then there was another section to be able to review championship resources. One, how do you deliver that in a normal environment, and why was it important to have that here?
Yeah, so the championship resources page was really a one-stop shop for anything that was available in advance of the championship. So anything like a media guide, a field list, some of these things that happen over the course of the week, like a prize payout, more of these one-off items that media are very interested in having access to. It's not as critical, and they shouldn't have as much prominence as kind of that those real-time alerts or those real-time videos or the schedule. But it's a one-stop shop for some of these very important documents to reference as they're covering the championship. So it was nice to just kind of have this place that if I needed a new document added, we could just throw it up there and kind of direct people that way.
And with all of this, obviously you built this in a way for media to efficiently and effectively cover the event remotely, but did you find that it was helpful at all for media that was on site?
Significantly. Yeah. I think we probably underplayed that going into it. We were so focused on providing a tool to support remote coverage. I don't know if I might just be speaking for myself, but I didn't necessarily realize how helpful it would be for those that were on site. Like I said, we started seeing media calling in to press conferences from the media center through the media hub rather than walking over, which is fine. The information that we were sharing through that news and alert section, it's not just for remote media. Those that were on site used it as well. So it serves multiple purposes. It serves multiple groups, and I think that's why we're all so excited about how we can continue to enhance the experience both on site and remote through the media hub.
It also is a great tool for staff and support. There, even on site, the event productions team and NMR that helped us kind of set up the whole press conference area. We set up a monitor that just loaded the schedule from the media hub. So they could keep an eye on the schedule and they could see, when was a lunch break, when could they fit a little lunch break, or when would they need to be kind of getting the microphones ready or turning on the camera. So they would be kind of checking aspects of the media hub too, from like a staff and planning perspective.
Fascinating. And what was so moving to the on-site operations, what was the makeup of the ops team and partners on site?
Yeah, so NMR was our AV crew. I want to say they had maybe 6 or 7 people, a camera operator, someone managing the audio. There were 2 or 3 individuals that were responsible for swapping out the microphones that players were using. Obviously, given kind of circumstances, we took as many precautions as possible to make sure it was a safe environment for players. So after a player was finished interviewing, finished with their press conference, we would swap out those microphones to make sure that they were safe to go. In terms of our staff, Liz was supporting Zoom press conferences, basically a production coordinator on that side. John Dever was moderating every interview. I managed the schedule, and Julius Mason, a senior director here at the PGA of America, was really tasked with making sure that we had players to bring over. So he was primarily the individual that would approach a player once they exited scoring. Thought we lost you, Liz.
I'm in a place where families walking in and out, so
got it.
A little noise in the background.
And how many days before the event did you get on site? Did the team get on site?
I got out there on Thursday before. I think most of the team showed up Sunday or so.
Yeah, I was there on Saturday. Flew in on Friday night.
And what did those few days look like from an operational perspective before things kicked off?
For me, it was really just getting comfortable with the lay of the land and making sure that I knew where things were. That part of my advanced week preparation was the same as any other year. I'm not familiar with a lot of the sites that we go to. I'll typically make one stop there before, but once structures are put up, it's kind of learning a brand new site. So really getting comfortable with the site plan. And I think we had maybe 2 or 3 rehearsals on the Zoom side to make sure that we were set up for our first interviews on Tuesday.
And for the technology side, we have a couple of vendors that we work with there who support infrastructure. So like not only the event production team, NMR, but we have Safari who does network infrastructure and sets that all up. And then we have a couple of folks who are like IT support that are on site. So we had some kickoff meetings with them, just kind of helped clarify and agree on roles and responsibilities. And then, how to triage and address any issues that might come up that are outside of the media hub. They might be anywhere. They could be in the media center. They could be in the clubhouse, wherever an issue might come up that's technology related, just making sure we had the right people in place to address issues.
And so you guys get on site. What were you most nervous about at that point?
coronavirus.
Serious? Yes. I mean, that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like, yeah, it's a scare. It was a scary thing.
Sure.
Just, you know, obviously you personally don't want to get sick, but you also don't want somebody in your
Yeah.
family who's at home to get sick and then you have trouble getting back to them. So that was first and foremost.
From a non-coronavirus standpoint. So yeah, that was a little bit of a loaded question.
Definitely, like the potentially any technology falling down. I mean, for us, you know, we worry about the leaderboard and scoring, and we worry about network infrastructure. Like, is Wi-Fi going to go down for the people who are supporting the event? And then for the media hub, there's the added complexity of a live Zoom call that's happening for, you know, however many 12 hours a day, every day of the championship, and getting people trained up on that, making sure everybody's comfortable using those tools, hoping that, you know, it feels seamless to the media folks who are watching and to the end, you know, the spectators who are watching ultimately.
Yeah. Pat, anything from your perspective?
I mean, Liz hit it all, but
yeah,
I would say I trusted all the partners that we were working with. I trusted the technology, so I wasn't as concerned. I think you're always worried about something falling down, but my biggest kind of fear was that there wouldn't be enough buy-in from media, just because it's a brand new tool and they've never used it before. So they quickly squashed that fear. They used it immediately and enjoyed it. So yeah, I think there's no precedent for it. Understanding the buy-in, predicting the buy-in, I should say, was certainly on my mind a lot.
Yeah. And was there one aha moment for you where you're like, oh, this is awesome, or whatever it was? I don't know if that's how you felt about it, but you know,
there actually was for me, and I think Liz, you probably remember this. Tiger was our second interview of the week. John Rahm was right before him. So we had two really high profile players coming through to start off our whole media hub experience, live press conference experience. And both of them were on ESPN platforms. I think John Rahm was on ESPN Plus, and then Tiger's interview was on SportsCenter. And I remember after Tiger's interview, I kind of looked over to my right to Liz, and I was like, we both just had this kind of sigh of relief of, okay, we're good. This is going to be fine. So that was the aha moment for me, for sure, of just, we got through what was probably the biggest interview of the week on Tuesday. And we knew that we're kind of in a good spot at that point.
That's
awesome. And same for you, Liz, or was there another moment?
Definitely that moment, but also having a specific, you know, a rep from the media walk over to me in the press area and compliment the media hub. To me, like, I was very nervous just about adoption, and to have somebody actually take the time to walk over and express that they were really, really genuinely happy with the product. And even when I pressed them and said, hey, you know, we love feedback and we'd love to know if you think it could be better. And they said, oh, no, I love it. It's great. I mean, to me, that was a big win. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. For me, randomly, I was watching an interview with two separate interviews, one with your president and CEO. And they mentioned it, and they were actually playing it up, and I'm like, they wouldn't play it up if that wasn't, so that was one. And then another one was with one of the lead broadcasters that was kind of talking about how helpful it was. And it was a pretty good moment from my standpoint. Just a couple more questions. Were there any informative stats and results that, you know, you guys look at and you're like, that made it a success?
Yeah. The number we have thrown out internally a lot is 102 interviews, which was more than we've done the last 3 years. So to be able to pull that off in a year like this was certainly something we're proud of. We had 229 unique participants that called into Zoom over the course of the week. So 229 people that either participated in an interview or at least engaged. 99 alerts. And then I think the most kind of telling stat is, despite having 5%, less than 5% of the on-site media that we had a year ago at Bethpage Black in 2019, the overall media impressions were about the same. Wow. Which tells me that people were covering this championship from wherever they were, in a way that reached really everywhere. So that was obviously super encouraging.
It's fascinating. And do you think, how do you think this impacts an event when you start to have fans again? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think, we want to use this moving forward because it's a game changer, not just for media. It's also a game changer for our staff and for those that are invested in the media operation. Like we said, this is a tool that I think we didn't pay as close attention to how much of an impact it would have on site. But it did. And like Liz said, there's folks that came up to her over the course of the week that acknowledged how much they enjoyed it and used it. So we know that there's value for on-site media. And it's really trying to best understand how we can continue to enhance it in a way that allows their experience to be, incredible.
Yeah. And I guess my last question is, what advice do you have for any organizations considering something like this? How would you approach it again? Would you do it any differently? When do organizations reach out? What are some of the things that you're kind of helping them with?
We spoke with the UFC through an introduction by you, Chris, and we spoke with them after the PGA Championship to kind of talk through our experience. And, it was kind of numbing to think about, generally speaking, nobody would compare professional golf to the UFC. But the problems that we're solving are very similar, if not the exact same, on the media side. So it's a tool that really changed the way that we worked, changed the way that we communicated with media. And it made it so much easier for everybody involved. So I think that's the one thing I would share with people is this is a communications tool at its core. It obviously has so many layers that are important, but if you're looking to improve your event communications with whoever your target group is, this is a tool that we certainly saw the value in it, and we're excited about how it's going to help us moving forward.
That's awesome. Well, I obviously, as always, I really appreciate the time. It was, such a great experience for us to get to work with you guys, and I'm excited to, continue the relationship. But in general, I think part of what makes this overall success is how kind of dialed in and buttoned up your teams were. I don't want, the technology is, important, but I think as important is, the kind of the operational expertise that you guys brought to the table. So it was really cool to see that from my end. So I think when you marry the two, and I do think that there's a lot of just inherent knowledge and expertise that, hopefully this type of interview will be able to share with other folks who are going through it or about to go through it. So again, as always, I really appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you so much. For having us.
We so appreciate Lennd and all of the experience and knowledge you guys bring to the table, and all of the contributions you guys made to the product that helped it be great and a success for us. So thank you.
Cool. Of course. Well, we'll talk to you guys soon.